Hi there. This is a quick tutorial for a grapple gun system using a cloth simulation. I came up with this method a year ago for my Batman renders and I thought it could be useful to share the process. Let's start off with a plane. Go into edit mode, press M, merge at center, so we're left with a single vertex. Then extrude to -10 meters on the y-axis. It is useful to keep it at a standard length and that will be more apparent later. Then with the whole mesh selected, right click subdivide and we're gonna add 50 subdivisions. I'll subdivide the end segments once more. This creates a smoother weight gradient so the endpoints don't look unnaturally stiff during the simulation. Then we're going to select both of the endpoints and add them to a new vertex group, and we'll call it pin. Then select one of the ends and hit Ctrl H and hook the new object, and then do the same for the other end. Now back to object mode. I'll change the empties to new shapes so they are a bit more readable here. Then let's add a cloth simulation to the mesh line. Default settings are fine for now, but we'll go down and add the pin group in the shape settings. Now we can play this back and move the empties and we can see that the cloth simulation follows the endpoints. Now when the playback resets, we can see that the cloth still moves as if the empties are moving. So to reset the simulation, just hit G, move the cursor a little and hit right click to reset the cache. Anytime you adjust the animation, reset the simulation cache so it updates correctly. Let's set a couple of keyframes here. Set the initial position for the hook empty, then another one at the world origin at 20 frames, and let's add a duplicate of that to 30 frames, which will be the launch moment. And then at like 100 frames, let's move it to -50 on the y-axis. You can move it wherever, but I'll set it to 50 for the demonstration. Now with these keyframes, you can see that the rope sags down and then tightens as the hook moves away. Here's where the shrinking factor comes in. We'll set the initial value to 1 so the rope is as tight as it can be and doesn't sag at all. Then when the launch happens, we'll set the shrinking factor to a negative value. The entire system works because the shrinking factor lets us artificially extend the rope beyond its original length. And here's where the initial 10 meter length comes into play. Since the rope starts at 10 meters and the hook moves to 50 meters, the cable needs to be 5 times longer. A shrinking factor of around -4 gives us that extension. So as the empty moves away, the rope extends along it. And we can offset the shrinking factor keyframes to have the rope shoot out with some slack and then tighten later as the winch kicks in. This is basically the whole simulation system. Play with these values to get a result you like and one that fits your scene. To get some thickness in the rope, we're gonna make a simple geometry node setup. Open a new window, set it to geometry nodes and add a new setup. And we're gonna add a couple of nodes. First a mesh to curve node, then a curve to mesh node, and a circle curve node that we're gonna use as the curve profile. If the cable looks too angular, add a subdivision surface node at the beginning. The advantage of this setup is that the cable keeps a constant radius. If you used a flat plane with solidify, the shrinking factor would also scale the thickness. Let's set the circle to a lower value and shrink the radius. Let's add a set material node and add a new material to the rope. In the texture editor, add a wave texture, set it to diagonal and set the scale to something like 200. Then add a texture coordinate and mapping node and set the coordinate to object and select the end hook. This makes it look like the cable is being pulled from a spool instead of just appearing out of nowhere. And with the grapple cable radius being small, like 6mm, this kind of simple wave pattern looks good enough. Disable the cable in render until the launch frame and then keyframe it back on. Then you don't see the initial pull and the rope appears to be launched from the grapple gun. And also, every time when working with simulations, bake the simulation before rendering, and you can even bake the geometry node setup to make sure it's stable in the final render. This requires you to save your project file, which you will probably do anyway. To use this setup in a shot, you can parent the setup to a grapple gun prop using child of constraints and then just keyframe the value when launching the cable so you can animate the hook to a rigid point in the scene. One limitation with the clot sim with only a line is that the clot collisions don't work, but you can do a workaround with the shrink wrap modifier before the geometry nodes and set it to outside so the rope doesn't clip through the floor, for example. And this setup can be expanded to a two-handed rope setup if you add another hook object to the next vertex from the base one, and keep it at the 0 location until your character grabs the rope with the other hand. Just some stuff to experiment with. And you can add the usual sparks, smoke VFX and get an end result similar to this. Let me know what you think about this video, and thank you for watching.